There's a place I have found in the shade on the ground, far from all worries and troubling sound. When I go there to be by myself, only me. No one can guess what I came there to see. There's a sun in the sky, there's a cloud drifting by. All kinds of birds make you wish you could fly. And in the distance I see someone waving at me. I hope that it's you, but who else could it be?
Hey, it's Monday morning here at Untold Radio. I hope everybody had a great weekend. I wish it was still the weekend, but it just seems like those couple of days go so fast lately. I don't know why, but it's great to be back on Untold Radio again. Starting to see some names pop into the chat that have kind of become regulars for us. I'm adjusting a little bit to this because for a year and a half, I've been doing the Pine Island Research Show on my old channel and here on Untold Radio now on Monday nights. And I get used to seeing the same 50, 60 names when we go live. And now that I'm doing the Coffee Time Show and featuring the hosts from the different podcasts here on the Untold Radio Network, I'm starting to see new names too. So, I just want everybody to know we really appreciate your support here at the Untold Radio Network. We try to offer podcasts that span the whole week that are interesting. I mean, they cover all areas of the paranormal, cryptozoology. I think it's a pretty good representation. And the guests the hosts are just absolutely amazing. I've really enjoyed doing this Coffee Time Show. Started it out with Doug Hajicek on. After that, since then, we've had a couple of the other guests. We had Brian King Sharp on. We've had last week, we had Jason McLean on. Really excited this week. Some of you may have seen the show already, but we have one of our shows that we have on Untold is Down South Anomalies, and it's a really interesting show. They cover all areas of the paranormal plus and then some. Focusing on Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, kind of in that southern area that maybe some of us who have an interest in the paranormal really don't get an opportunity to look at and hear about. We see a lot of shows being done about the United States, Canada, and Great Britain, throughout Europe, but you don't see as much covering Australia. So I was really excited when Jay and Aspacia brought the show to the Untold Radio Network. Because it wasn't going to be entertainment for me. It was going to be a chance to really learn about a different area of the world that I didn't know a lot about, if I'm being honest. So I'm excited to bring them in. I'm not going to waste any more time in doing so. Good morning.
Good morning, and it's really early morning for us.
Yeah, so we should explain to folks, you guys are in Australia. You're 17 hours in front of me. I'm in the central time zone in the U.S. here, where our Untold Radio headquarters is in Minnesota. So although it's 10:30 a.m. Central Time here, it's 3:30 a.m. tomorrow morning in Australia.
Yes, it is.
You got a couple of hours in. I
got a couple of hours
I'd
sleep,
wait it out. Yeah, but it's a real pleasure to be with you, Jeff, and I really appreciate your comradeship and the Untold Radio Network we are adoring.
I appreciate you guys coming on despite the time difference. I usually get used to, like, I've had guests from Ireland, I've had guests from the UK, 6 hours difference, not too hard to work around.
Sure.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around what it would be like to be in tomorrow. I mean, it's 10:30 in the morning here, and you guys it's Tuesday there.
Tuesday,
So
yeah.
it's
Yeah. When you're
crazy
speaking
good.
with the future,
Yes.
we are your future down here.
I take comfort in that. I've realized that if you guys are on screen live, that means I've got at least one more day to go.
You
That
do.
like
You've
the
got
world's not gonna end for tomorrow because you
no,
guys are all
for sure. We've got at least 16 hours of time difference. We muddled up that time difference, didn't we, with Christopher Noel? We were out by an hour there at one
Yeah,
stage, but it
yeah.
was fine in Minneapolis.
No, 2 hours.
Yeah, 2
Anyway,
hours. It was
doesn't matter.
crazy.
yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons why I'm really looking forward to having you guys on was not just talk about your show, but there's a point in the show where we usually spend some time getting to know our hosts, and
Mhm.
even somebody who's been on that a lot of the people are familiar with, like Jason McClain, even Doug. We see these guys on hundreds of podcasts, a lot of times as guests, sometimes as hosts, and you feel like you're getting to know them, but there's always that area that you really don't know. Like, you might watch 10 podcasts a guest and you don't realize that one of his big passions is building e-bikes and things like that. And so this is a great opportunity for our listeners and our viewers to learn about Jay and Aspacia. And I think it's one of the things that I find intriguing about you, Jay, is kind of like me in high school. You were already in a band, you were involved with music, and you were really one of the pioneers, so to speak, in Australia in that punk rock music scene.
Well, there were many pioneers, and I think I was a bit of a Johnny come lately to that, but that's very kind for you to say that. I sort of came later. I was there when punk had merged into no wave, new wave, and then became noise. And noise was incredible for me because you needed no scholarship whatsoever in music. But punk, and you are so knowledgeable, Jeff, it astounds me. You're a musician yourself and you've played with some extraordinary acts. But punk was an extraordinary thing in Australia, and we had a very conservative country. And for the first time, you'd actually start to see a bit of colour and dress and theatre occurring. And what I loved about punk was the DIY ethic of it. The mere fact that, if you knew 3 chords and you had a safety pin for your clothing,
You're
well,
good
you
to
were the
go.
height of fashion, you're ready to go. And I've always felt that people need to be empowered and literally need to be empowered instantly. So that music was a great anarchic pathway to actually expressing yourself. And we've
Yeah.
discussed this before. The music is probably one of the most powerful art forms because it's economic in time, it gets straight to the heart of the matter, and people can be cathartic in what they have to say. And so I had this deep desire. I was writing to avant-garde bands like San Francisco's The Residents when I was a 14-year-old and thanking them for putting grills in the face of the Beatles on their first cover, Meet the Beatles, because I was always about the obscure things. And
Yeah.
you were right about punk. I mean, the Saints, with their single I'm Stranded, got into the ears of, the producer over there of the Sex Pistols, Malcolm McLaren, and he freaked out. And I believe that's one of the reasons why Nevermind the Bollocks is such a disgraceful piece of art for that cover of that album, that they raced to get it out there going, oh my God, these people that we thought were naive colonialists stuck in this penal colony have actually discovered something I haven't marketed properly yet. And so I think that because of the tyranny of distance, we had nothing else to do but to go out there. If you felt outside of your culture slightly, you went out there and became a big freak in that culture.
Yeah. You know, it was interesting. I've kind of looked at not just the punk genre, but rock and roll, and you see the progression it took in New York or LA, in London, you know, and then you see what happened in Australia, and you know, Sydney obviously was kind of the epicenter of where it starts, but to see how it progressed through Melbourne and you know, into the other areas of Australia, Brisbane, how it affected the listeners. And literally, you had these 4 or 5 bands that kind of started pushing a little snowball down a mountain. And all these fans and all these listeners started organizing their own little band. Because, like you say, get a cheap guitar and an amp and close the garage door and let it rip.
And you're there.
Away you go.
And but I think one of the most interesting things is for those who aren't geographically familiar with Australia, Perth is kind of like a prison on Mars, so to speak. I mean, geographically, it's really isolated.
I think geographically it is noted as the most remote city in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. For a larger city, it's really nothing's there. And you have to cross a lot of
there's an expanse.
inhospitable
Yeah.
country just to get to it, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And we've driven that land a few times, haven't we?
You have.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
haven't.
Well, you've driven to Adelaide.
I stayed. Oh, yeah, we did drive to Adelaide. That's sort of
It's amazing.
a third of the
It's
way
so
across.
hypnotic.
But to see that punk music scene take off in Perth, you know, it may have been mirrored a year or two, but the way that it took off was so interesting. And you had 3 or 4 big names that started some pretty notable bands.
Mhm.
And then those bands, like we often see all over the world, one of those that main band will break up, and those 3 members will all start bands, and then those bands will get good and get popular, and then they break up, and those turn. It's like one band turned into like 11 bands in no time. It's like bunny rabbits over there. But no,
and they've always had a great relationship with the other countries. I mean, Europe has never stopped selling a lot of that punk and new wave music. It is still rapidly purchased today. And America, so many different acts have collaborated, as you said before. I think it's that thing, you know, in the late 60s, music and culture started to see the value in other ethnicities and merging that sound and finding all these new translations to it. And I think we sort of realized that the hippie movement wasn't going to be our savior. And then we started to get quite cynical. Like with the assassination of Kennedy and all those things, it sort of carved its way into the culture. And that sort of bred that path for punk, that bred to even more extreme styles of no wave and then noise music. But, you know, all those genres are very buoyant today and still doing astounding music. The amount of incredible independent music being produced. And today, you know what it's like, what a dream it is that you can actually record professionally in your own home and literally don't need to have anyone. It is so different now.
When I give my kid a guitar and he's like, "You gonna give me lessons?" I'm like, "I'll teach you anything you want to play, but you've got an advantage that I didn't have. Any song you want to play, there's 18 tutorials on YouTube showing you note for note how to play it. I didn't have that. We listened to it on a cassette tape and just kept plucking away and teaching ourselves till we figured out what the chords were and what the progression was and all of that. You know, there was no somebody on a video teaching you how to play something back then.
But I tell you what, the cassette was a real breakthrough. I can remember actually, you know, in the early 80s, making these cassettes on my own label, Direct Tapes, and sending them out to the world thinking I was an international artist. and I had only 30 of them, but they would be reviewed by things like Cassette Gazette out of Britain. And all of a sudden you go, I've been reviewed. It's incredible. So that notion of being able to record in its most primitive stages before real sampling. I mean, I don't know if you remember, Jeff, the Mellotron and the Novatron. And they were like tape loop keyboards. Every key was actually a tape loop with a tape head. Well, they were our sampling devices when we were experimental artists.
Sure.
Yeah.
And for people who are in chat who maybe, maybe we're speaking a little French to some of them, but what the way, today's home studios that you see are all digital and everything's stored on hard drives and stuff. Back then, you had a cassette recorder that was a 4-track recorder on a cassette tape. So you could lay 4 tracks, but if you laid a 4th track on it, you kind of locked it up and you couldn't go anywhere. So what I was doing with my 4-track recorders was what they called ping ponging. I'd lay a guitar
Bouncing
track,
them down.
I'd lay a vocal track, I'd lay a bass track. And then when those 3 tracks, those first 3 were done, I'd play all 3 of them and record it onto the 4th one. And you could
Smart.
now open up and redo the first 3 tracks again. So you could put together a song that had 12 different tracks on it, drums, multiple vocals, all that, using a 4-track recorder. You probably lost a little bit of quality when you ping ponged to those tracks to that 4th track. But yeah, it was, I mean, when you were a kid, I mean, kids now, it's like PlayStation and all that. Back then, if you were a kid who was into music, it was guitar pedals and 4-track recorders and stuff like that. But, one of the things I really find interesting that is so common, it doesn't matter what part of the world you're looking at with the punk scene, was in the 70s and especially into the 80s. This was a genre of music in which, and I think this quality transferred also kind of when really hard rock and heavy metal started coming out in the later 80s and 90s. But it was an opportunity to really express your feelings, and they weren't all feelings of joy. I mean, you look at it, kids who were frustrated, kids who were unhappy, they could feel that energy in that music, and it was a way that could let it out without it being, I could voice my disgruntledness here. I could let you know why I'm upset through music, and I could find music that felt like I was feeling if that's where you're at. Nowadays, you got kids burning down convenience stores and stealing and crashing cars, whatever, because they don't really have that outlet. Back then, that's what you did if you were a kid who felt isolated. And I think that Australia, I've watched a lot of films that capture life as a youth in Australia. And, when you get outside of Sydney, in these rural areas, there was really a lot of nothing to do.
There was a lot of nothing in the city areas. And we've had a friend recently, Peter Doyle. Maybe you can talk about what Peter's done at the Crime and Justice Museum with those 100,000 glass negatives from the 20s. And
oh no, you go.
Okay.
You're right.
Well, he showed us this whole pile of police photographs that went from the 20s right into the 60s. And even going into the middle class areas, life was very bland.
Oh, yeah.
It was hard. You'd hardly find an interesting piece of bric-a-brac in a middle class home.
Yeah.
And I think that's the mere fact that we have a very short history, and we are, as we are this morning, broadcasting again on stolen land, indigenous land, and from a culture that for many ways the colonialists thought they were going to call it terra nullius.
Well,
there was no one here. And one of the most profound cultures on the planet. And so I think that we have this background sense of being these convicts
Mm.
that have been dragged here. We had the worst of the British Guard because they were sent to this faraway land, and we had supposedly the worst convicts, even though quite a few of them, and I believe my family included
here
in
we
that,
go.
just stole a
They
loaf of
stole a
bread.
loaf of bread.
Yeah.
I doubt it very
But you
much.
migrated
anyway.
here, didn't you, Asper, too? And
Yeah.
you copped a lot in this culture coming here
Well,
initially.
yeah.
You came from, explain your story of coming to Sydney.
Oh, just well, we came from my parents emigrated from Greece to Belgium actually, and they had 4 daughters, 4 kids in Belgium, and then they emigrated to Australia again. So they did the migration thing twice, which I think would have been really, really difficult for them.
Yeah, of course.
And they did it like 10 years later. So it was a lot harder when they came here. Came to Australia the second time. They weren't so young, and they had 4 kids to look after, and really had to work hard. And the culture going from Europe, they went from Belgium, which is a very cosmopolitan country, to coming to Australia, which was very, very. It was very backward here.
Yeah.
There was not much culture. It was all very bland, and
I think too,
difficult.
when you've got that sense of oppression, you actually reach out further. I started writing letters overseas. I thought I'm never going to be able to travel. I had this sort of inclination to go into helping services like nursing and welfare. And the best thing I could do was write letters. And, all of a sudden I was getting records in from overseas, and that just became an absolute passion. Let's try and find stuff that's not easily available. And I think both of us have got that in a sense.
Yes, we
You've
do.
got that migrant upbringing that gave you this huge insight. You could also see this culture that was pretty frightening in terms of its British colonialism.
Yeah.
I'm going to play a video. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what we're about to see? It's called Love and Anarchy.
Yeah, that's us.
And that's a weird thing. I think there's a brand new Netflix series with that same title now.
Isn't
and
that
I think,
funny?
and
Everything's cyclic, right? It's going to come back
it's
around.
cyclic. Well, we were very lucky. I got attached to a documentary that involved Alex Poirez, the director of Crow with the late Brandon Lee, and iRobots, and
what was the one? The
Gods of Eden.
Gods of Eden.
Yeah,
that's not
Dark
City.
City.
Yeah,
Anyway,
Dark City. That was
and it was to be a TV program. We were going to use I actually did a screen test with Doc Neeson, the late Doc Neeson, the lead singer of the Angels. He became the host of this show, and it was called Conspiracy, in which we actually interviewed the first Australian crew to go over there and interview Bob Lazar in the early 90s. But through that project, the director became obsessed with our story and our love affair and our relationship, and put together this amazing documentary. And the frightening thing, Jeff, must be just like looking at shots from 20 years ago. You realize just how quickly you freaking well aged, So here we are about 20 years ago, and
So
explain this.
This is the trailer for the documentary. It's a television hour documentary that was done for SBS, which is our special broadcaster here in Australia. It's one of the channels.
It was a pioneering.
It was a very pioneering free to air channel that was a special that did special especially immigrant films and
foreign films,
foreign and television shows.
It would send people out all over the world, and they would have some of the rarest subtitle prints. And I believe there was a bootlegger professor out of Miami calling himself Miami Video Search. He ended up having half the SBS library and made quite a few $1 million by just getting in there and bootlegging those TV. Well, those films that they'd actually been attached to. Anyway, let's have a look.
Let's have a look at this this trailer.
This will be a shock for people.
Yeah, so
it was
this
a shock
is
for my mum and dad.
Snapshot of it's kind of a snapshot of a pretty significant period in your life, really.
Oh yeah.
It's pull this up.
Greatest quality of this
West is he alive or did he die? It was confounding. I mean, it's completely confounding and not at all what I expected. I expected to see maybe some kind of assaultive noise troop or something that was it was something else entirely.
Well, I don't think I consciously set out to make the Mesons a form of therapy.
But it's partially better from the so-called schizophrenia. There were these like voices coming off the stage. Some of them were totally maniacal and crazy. Some of them were like sane and sensible, and one of those sensible noises was Jamie.
I was always fascinated with the notion of illness, and when I started working as a nurse, I realised how marginal these people were in the community.
These characters, they are fairy godmother angels, and they're little wizard leprechaun angel.
See, I love you when you're creating your art because you're calmer. I think the thing about outsider art to me is that it's such a unique and original form of creativity. It goes beyond anything that I've felt is contrived creativity, but they seem to have an incredible power from within, a power of origin when they didn't seem to take other things around them and reuse them. It came basically from inside.
Well, I think Jamie today is a risk taker when there's very few risks around. People that are prepared to put on a show, whether it's The Sounds of Seduction or screen the Maison archives, he offers them something that they wouldn't find any in town.
I walked into that this nursing home where Jamie was, and that was it.
You say that was it?
That was it. That was like easy.
Asper, I thought if there's anyone out there in this world that can now handle all the mad people I know, is we're all sleeping at the end of my bed when I did them 3 and 4 weeks before and afterwards. I thought, well, Asper's going to be the person that can cope with that. Days later,
I sorted it out. I sorted it out.
Your husband came and sorted me out a bit physically, but that's life.
In a way, I was completely healed. What I've been looking for ages. That to me is like what I envisage to be the neediest group in the community. People basically with nothing, no roof over their head, no shelter, no food in their stomach, and getting to them through my own means. Good morning, gentlemen. It was a shock to find that people could actually die from neglect on the streets of Sydney. All right, gentlemen. Gee, they're running you into the ground at that office, aren't they? Until in the end, when we finally got a Saturday night, bang, and that was the Sounds of Seduction. It was very exciting because for the first time ever, it had liberated us from having to go out there and work 5 to 6 days a week to pay the rent. It just gave us enough to get by, but it liberated us and let us actually bathe ourselves in all those things that we've always loved.
Jamie's retro was just classy, rare, unique retro. It has a real discerning taste for quality. It wasn't your run-of-the-mill Kmart retro.
Music for some people is not a lifestyle or a means of social statement is actually a necessity. It keeps alive. You recently like and James is a ringmaster.
Imagine trying to take this on the road, and this is the smallest version of it. We can get to 17 members. If the Metro was 17, they would never let us back there again. Oh God.
No.
Manhattan recognised us as an entity on our own and gave us that respect and acknowledgement. We're astounded it actually happened from an overseas artist when it's never really happened in this country from people around us. Let's rock and roll, Bill.
We can't really predict what the future will be. We just know that we're going to be all right because what we've chosen to do is in our hearts.
Sorry if that was clipping
Well,
there.
yeah, that it's really a good no, it's really a good representation of exactly where you were at that point. And it's so neat to see
Well,
you two.
it was only a snapshot because at that time as well, we were heavily into, researching the, UFOs and ghosts and the anomalous big time. They even tried to film some of it to include it because it, would have been a bit more well-rounded because but they just, I don't know why they
I think they
didn't.
just thought there was just too much to
Too
us.
much stuff to it, yeah.
Jeff, we've always considered ourselves maximalists. We actually live in a warehouse. We've been here for 22 years, and there must be. There's literally thousands of books, thousands of records.
Films,
35 millimeter, 16 millimeter. We've got some very rare material here. And, I'm sure if we drop dead tomorrow, it'd all go into a mini skip and no one would give a damn. But we just can't do things on a small scale.
No.
You do so much work where you need material. And
yeah. So it's just we just
So
drag everything in. And
it was a
utilize.
very extraordinary moment for us to think that a director could see that our story was worthy of going up there for a television special. It just made me feel in my heart of hearts that maybe everyone's story is worthy of 52 minutes.
No. No.
They're just not going to get it. And that's
Give
us
everybody a
standing in
little
the
idea
archives.
when you
This is some of our shelving, with our films.
when you
and stuff
talk about
that
how
we-
much film you have. It's
Oh
just,
God, we've got shelves of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's literally, I'd say a couple of thousand
Yeah.
rolls of film.
Yeah.
and we don't have it in
Wow.
protected circumstances. We
Yeah.
are still renting with not much super in our mid
No super.
60s.
Yeah.
So we're crazy people. We're still acting like teenagers. But because we've followed our passion, and I'm very lucky to have met my wife, who intuitively knew that I was going to be with her.
We enable each other.
Now,
We are
tell them the
enablers.
story that I was working at a therapist at a different nursing home. Explain
Oh
that.
God, look,
And that was your intuition,
yeah,
wasn't
it was like when because we were both diversional therapists at the time. We were both working with well, Johnny was working in a nursing home for geriatrics. I was working in a nursing home for the developmentally disabled and psych affected. So the nursing home I was in was actually the dumping ground of all the people that didn't fit into the, little old lady with a knee rug, and dementia, because they wanted, people wanted to go and meet see their mum in the nursing home with a whole bunch of other mums and dads, older people that had dementia. Whereas the people that I worked with, actually a lot of them came from an island called Pete Island that had been sequestered there out of sight to the public, and then the institution was closed down, and then they had to be sent out to nursing homes, and those people were deemed problem nursing home people. So what ended up happening, they all ended up being dumped in this one place, and that's where I ended up working. And we had sister nursing homes where there was geriatric people, and Jamie ended up at one of them, and I was sent over to give him a hand because he'd taken over the job of these two women. They downsized, and they had one person for 140 of the residents.
140 people.
You're not even going to get time to actually see everybody. So I went over there, and before I even went over, I kind of knew my life was actually going to change. I don't know what it was. It was one of those anomalous moments that I knew that this person that I was going to meet was going to somehow change my life. And I was really quite, anxious and apprehensive, yet excited. And then when I walked in there and saw Jamie, I thought, oh my God, that's who I'm supposed to be with. And I was married and with a child at the time. And I thought, what the hell is going on here? This is really bizarre. Why am I even thinking this? And look, 32 years later,
we
here
never
we are.
we never went behind anyone's back, and
No,
my
we
wife
didn't.
never articulated that to me till I was on a bus trip with 32 of these disabled, institutionalized individuals for the first time in 15 years, going up to Port Macquarie. And
Yeah.
that really tipped me over the deep end. But I had admired who she was. She had left a well-paying job in the middle of Sydney in the Strand Arcade doing seamstress work for a big fashion designer and gone to work for like a tenth of the salary in the most extreme labor field that was so understaffed and no one gave a damn. And I just thought, I really admire this person. But I think the most important thing there was your intuition, your foresight,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
we are still extremely
That's
happy.
really interesting.
Mm.
When you had
How
that
did you meet your
epiphany
wife?
moment.
You've got beautiful kids. I want to know that story.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you that here in just a minute. But I wanted to comment on, what Aspacia had experienced at that point. I mean, I think that there are times in people's lives where they kind of have that epiphany or that revelation moment where I'm not in the right place and I'm looking at where I need to be, and that intellectual discipline to recognize that and make those changes and say, I'm going to follow this path that I can identify my destiny. This is what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people miss those opportunities, or they find themselves in those moments and say, either leaving one job for another opportunity, and that opportunity presented itself. And it's just, I'm afraid of the change, or I'm
It
afraid of
is. That's
leaving
the
what
big
I'm
thing.
familiar with.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And going to somewhere that's totally unknown. It's like, what's going to happen to me? I've got this life established here, and if I throw all this away, what am I throwing it away for? It's not knowing and being able to assess whether it's worth throwing it away for or not. And that's where you have to take a leap of faith and say, you know what, I'm just going to go there and see, because I'm here now, and obviously if I'm thinking of going somewhere else and not even knowing what's there, then clearly I'm not happy here and I need to go.
yeah, I mean, if
You
you're
know,
entertaining the thought, there's a
Yeah,
reason,
absolutely.
right?
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
we had a guest on our show last week, Tara Foster. Tara Australis, she calls
Yeah.
herself. She is an incredible one-woman powerhouse producer, and thank you for being in the chat. It's very difficult for us to actually do the live stream. We are there for the chat, but we pre-record everything
Yeah.
because of this hour
Mhm.
that we're doing it at midday on a Saturday.
Yeah.
Seems to be a time when all our guests are busy doing other things. But Tara told us, and I was astounded because she has traveled the world. She's done astounding things. She told us that she was in a relationship she was feeling suffocated in.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
one day she made the decision to pack everything up, buy a push bike, she'd never ridden one, and tour the length and breadth of Ireland solo, and to just reset
Yeah, I
herself.
heard
Yeah.
her talking about that.
And I thought that is
I'll
an
tell you
incredible
that
epiphanous
guest,
moment.
yeah, that guest, Tara, she had one of the most impressive as well as intriguing resumes that
Mm.
I've ever heard anybody have being introduced as a guest. I mean, and she, for her age, to have accomplished all the things she's accomplished in that type of a she not only was directing and right, you know, she's such a creative, and you can really tell that
Absolutely.
when you hear her speak
Powerhouse.
about that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
people like that, and it's
Yeah.
people like
So
yourself.
you
It's
ask,
people on.
Sorry, go ahead.
I jumped on
no,
you there.
you
So
go ahead, Jay. It's
Oh,
no, go
you
ahead.
know, it's like Doug, and it's like the other hosts of Untold Radio. They're all so motivated that being around them, and yourself included, Jeff, and seeing the depth of your drive and passion, and it's like being around Tara, it can't help but elevate you.
Mm.
You actually want to get more out of your life. You want to experience more, and you know what it's like when you get a few years up. You realize time is running out,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, and life is a really incredible thing for any of us to have had the gamble and the dice roll in our favor, to have a bit of health, to have a bit of love in our life. We are so profoundly lucky.
Yeah.
Mm.
And then to be building this extraordinary community, you know, every time I listen to the podcasts, and I mean, this is couples day for you. I mean, tonight you're actually doing on your program, Pine Island Research, you've got Tim and Dana on there, Bigfoot influencers, and their relationship is incredibly profound, especially in this field, which there is so much ridicule. To find a partner that actually not just accepts the way that you think, but embraces it as well, it's a rare commodity.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I find myself constantly trying to focus on, you know, I think all of us at some point, you've got people that appreciate what you do, people who find value in what you're doing, and you're going to have people that want to critique what you're doing, or, you know, they're just the type of person that needs to voice their, you know, their differences with you. And, you know, that used to kind of hurt a little bit. I mean, I'd read that stuff. I'd read an email and think, what, you know, but
Yeah.
I think about some of these people who are truly famous, right? I mean, have really elevated to where they get 300-400 emails probably an hour.
Yeah.
And they open up their mails, and you know, whether it's Twitter posts, whether it's emails, you know, 20, 30, 40% of those are ripping them apart. And you know what? They don't care. They just keep moving on. They keep doing their thing. And that's really, if you've got to find value in what you're doing, and you truly find value in what you're doing, those people won't get to you. They won't. It is easy to let it roll off your back. And I certainly don't try to approach anything, whether it was back when I was playing music or doing these podcasts. I don't share anything with the vanity that everybody will find value in. I'm a realist. I get it. There's a lot of people who are going to say, I don't click with that guy, right? I'm okay with that. But
you know what?
No, you asked how I had met my wife. I was bartending at a bar. I had gotten out of the military and finished college, started my career, and I was, I think, 28 years old. I was bartending at a bar on the side. It was a pretty big bar. And I'd gotten off early one night, and she had came in with some friends who, a couple of her friends were mutual friends of mine. And so I was sitting down with a little of 8 of them. And at one point, I mean, I was just talking to her. It seemed like we were getting along, and she asked me, do you want to dance? And Jay, when I kind of grew up playing guitar on a stage, watching everyone else dance, dancing just wasn't something I did that much, right? It felt like I was on the wrong side of the fence. I'd rather play the music than dance to the music. But so I said no. And I didn't say it in a mean way. I just said, you know, we're okay. And then a little bit later, we were talking and we were really hitting it off, and I had put my hand on her arm while I was talking to her, and she's like, "So are you ready to dance?" And I was like, "Oh, what the hell? Let's just go dance. How bad is it gonna be?" And I think there's probably only been about, in that first 10 years of our relationship, we had dated for a year, got engaged, got married. We were probably only apart a dozen nights. I mean, from that night I met her, we were just inseparable. But she shared with me since then. She goes, "Man, you really threw a lot of mixed signals that night we met. I asked you to dance and you said no. And then later on, you put your hand on my arm." I'm like, "What's this guy at? Does he like me or not?" And in retrospect, I get what she's saying. It wasn't really as apparent to me in the moment, but yeah, it was just friends of friends that happened. They didn't have any plan to go there. She didn't have any plan to meet a guy that night. She was just hanging out with her friends, and they happened to have been friends of mine. So, but you're right. It led into a great thing, a great relationship. We have 2 sons who are 17 and 18.
They're great looking men. Beautiful boys.
Yeah, they are. I am truly blessed. I mean, when I think about all the crap that I did growing up, and I've got 2 boys that are such well-behaved, and I mean, everybody who meets him are like, "Man, what a great kid. He's so nice and polite." And
that's because your
feel
heart's in the right place. Your wife and your heart are in the right place. And thing about I never understood myself, that thing about wanting to be away from your wife, your partner's company. Why in the hell would you have a relationship with anyone unless I need my wife by my side every second of the day. And that's why we found a way of working together.
Yeah.
And we do everything together. We still DJ together. We perform together. We lecture. We do film screenings together, and we never go sick and tired of each other's company. Look, we'll argue, and my wife can actually take a door off its hinges without using any implement but her mind. But and that's all part and parcel of it.
Well, you know what? I always say, if you love passionately, you're going to fight passionately. That's just the way it is.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I would agree with that. I mean, I can think back and I can recall arguments over what color we're going to paint something. I mean, it's like, this isn't even worth arguing about, right? But
no, of course not.
Yeah.
But I think part of that is knowing that you're in a relationship that even when you passionately disagree with something,
sure,
that an hour later we can move on, right? That
you come back from it.
There is no. Yeah, there's no scars,
and I think
I
think the danger is when you hold it all inside. And that's what I worry about, people who've gone through these experiences, like having an experience like you've had, your encounter, or someone who's had an anomalous encounter, because of the culture and the ridicule thrown up about this, and then science not coming on board, then people actually hide. The amount of reports we're getting and we're able to document and sort of start to state some sort of statistical analysis from is very few, I believe, in the amount of anomalous experience people have. We were discussing this before. I think just about everyone's had something unusual occur to them. And, we sort of veer away from the words paranormal and supernatural. I think all that stuff is actually natural. It's normal. And it's just a huge myriad of this phenomena that's occurring around us. And some of the worst debunkers in the world, Michael Persinger and Susan Blackmore, they're academics. If you go back and look at their history, they had some unusual experience that they are trying to rationally resolve. And sometimes I think a lot of this stuff is way beyond our comprehension. And so
Sure.
what I love about your show is the mere fact that you get people on there that some of that community might not be happy with, because it brings in the woo factor. And the woo factor is something that we could not deny within the first decade of our field research to do with ufology, that we were finding that people were having a whole myriad of other experiences. Researchers just weren't asking about them.
Or if they were being told about them, they would dismiss or cherry pick and say, oh, well, yeah, okay, well, they're having that as well, but we're going to focus on this and go there and discount everything else. And you kind of can't discount everything, because I think everything is part and parcel of what's going on. And if you discount it, then you're going to be missing a huge chunk of the puzzle. And we need more pieces of this puzzle to put together, because we've all been looking at these puzzles for a long time, and we're still not getting any further along, because obviously we're missing something.
And I think also the mere fact that it's not just, investigative journalism. I like to get out there and do field research. It's detective work. And detectives will tell you, you never throw out any eyewitness testimony. You always keep
it all.
The evidence, and no matter how strange it appears to be, because at some point in time, it may make complete sense. So we've just pulled back. As we get older, we pull back. We try and assist with people to reintegrate or go and see a psychologist, or maybe even see a psychiatrist if this is really getting you down. But the main thing is to give that support and just pull back and don't have a hypothesis, but go, we're going to take everything into consideration. That's why I loved your last guest. I keep going on about Brown Dwarf because of his soul and what he had to say, and his notion to be open to all of this. And I think Jim Myers from Sasquatch Outpost is really saying that as well. His guest, Jim Hewlin, last week just blew my mind, because you've got someone there from generations of hunters that won't go in with any weapon anymore, that feels like they need to actually reset, sort of make a prayer and go in with good intention. And then profound things happen to him in the wilderness because of that.
Yeah. And I think that, well, I mean, for me, it was about our relationship and all of that. I had
sorry.
Yeah.
I was 18. I was 29 before I got married. And for 18 years we were married, and I never told my wife about that encounter. I never told anybody about that encounter. I every now and then I talk to my friend who was with me that day. The reasons why I did is I owned a real estate firm, and I did real estate development with a couple different people who were very wealthy and very influential.
Right.
And that's really how I was making the majority of my income. And I just felt like it's not how are thousands of people going to perceive me. If half of them don't believe me, I don't care. But when there's 3 or 4 people that are like, if they don't believe me, or if they don't, or if they look at me differently now, this is really going to affect my ability to make a living. And then prior to that, when I was in the military for years, I had a security clearance, and I felt like if I talked to anybody about this, they're just going to take this away from me. And so there was always this, and also YouTube and these communities and these podcasts and the realization that there's other people that have experienced what I experienced. That wasn't easy back then, for quite a while.
Of course not.
And that just wasn't available. And so now that now that, so then one day I walked out into the living room and I heard her go, "Oh my," like out loud. And I thought something was wrong. So I walk out in the living room. I said, "What's wrong?" And she says, "Nothing." She says, "I'm listening to this podcast." And I said, "What are you listening to?" She says, "I'm listening to this show called How to Hunt by Steve." And she said, "You aren't going to believe some of these sharing their encounters of Bigfoot." And I said, "You watch that podcast?" She goes, "Yeah, I watch it all the time." And I was like, "Really?" And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "Stay right there." And I went downstairs to our family room to the beer fridge and grabbed 2 beers out and came up and said, "Let's go sit on the deck." And we went out and sat on the deck. And I says, "I'm going to tell you my encounter story." And I spent 2 hours talking to her about it. And she was in tears that I hadn't chose to tell her about this. And I said, I've had to make decisions when I was in the military that I can't share this job. When I own a real estate, I can't share this, or people aren't going to do business with me. I've got investors that I'm partnered with. And when I look at you and our children, and I'm thinking, I could afford to have anybody on this earth not believe me and survive, but I wouldn't be able to do that if you didn't. And that's why I spent 20-some, 30 years telling anybody.
Wow.
But I'll be honest with you, after I shared this with her and started getting involved in not only educating myself on at least what the community had to say about the subject, but then started doing research. And then I met Doug Hajicek and trying to look at a different way to do research. I didn't feel like Patterson Gimlin left the ball on the 5-yard line, decades ago, and there's nobody touched on it yet. Like, this thing isn't moving, right? And so going out there and doing what everybody else was doing, what everybody else is doing with their techniques and their approach, I just felt like that would be a waste of time because somebody would have succeeded by now.
Exactly.
And so Doug helped me kind of open my mind up to different approaches to this. But that's kind of people ask me all the time, "Dude, how could you be married to somebody 18 years and not tell them about this?" In retrospect, a little bit, I'm with that a little bit. I think about, are you afraid? What happens if she says you're crazy? This is the person that I love and that I have staked everything in this life with.
I think it's a true dilemma.
So
I
just felt like there's an awful lot to lose.
And I think it's only natural and rational that you felt that way. And my deepest sorrow is, I'd say that your story is not rare in that regard.
No.
And it's amazing too, when you actually find that person that you click into, you might be aware of just how your intuition has put you there and how that person is going to be open to any weirdness within your soul. And is a weirdness? Not really. I mean, you had a genuinely astounding encounter. Can we just hear a little bit of that potted encounter? Aspa is not aware of it, I don't think.
Well, not the finer details.
Can you do a quick version of it, Jeff?
You'll have to cut different channels where I've shared it entirely. And also, I have a book coming out here in about 3 weeks, Doug's company, Hanger One Publishing, called The Island Incident, that talks about the first half of the book is the encounter. The second half of the book is...
Well, I don't want to be a spoiler in that regard either.
What I've done and where I go. Yeah. But I'm going to, you know what, Jay, I'm going to send you a copy of it right after the show here so that you guys can read it before for others. I'd be interested.
That
in hearing
is
your
exciting. And you
Mhm.
know what? If you're searching for any rare literature, send us a line and maybe we can find something in our building and
Oh
send
my
it back
God.
because we need to downsize something bad fast.
Yeah,
But
but we're
anyway,
not going to.
anyway, look, it's probably best that we don't go into that encounter now.
Yeah, that's all right. I can wait to read it.
It sounds so profound. There was something though in that
Well, and I'll
narrative that
send you
really
some
hit me.
links where I've shared it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be good.
I'll share
Your
you. I'll share some
reaction,
links where I've shared it online.
Mhm.
your reaction to that encounter stayed with me though, and took me to a different level of thinking about the experience you had. It took me back to this notion of intuition, because you should have been petrified. You had something thrown at you that knocked you over, and yet you did not feel that that was anything to do with this parallel hominid doing you harm, which sounds so ironic.
You know, I
Are you
think
there? Did I ask the
I
wrong
talked
person?
about this on an interview. No, it's on an interview that I recently did on another channel. That I think one of the things I really had going on that I had no really what Bigfoot was. I remember at a very young age seeing the PG film and a trailer before a movie at a theater before a scary and I was intrigued by it. But you know, other than hearing references and comic stuff, I didn't grow up with it. Who sat around the campfire, told stories, Bigfoot. I had no reference to this, and so at 18 years old, I grew up the son of a hunting and fishing guy. I was not unfamiliar with being in very remote areas, hunting elk, bear, things like that. Did that since I was 12, 13 years old. But standing on an island on a lake in northern Manitoba, staring what I was staring at, I didn't look at it and say, wow, that must be Sasquatch. I probably would now at 54 years old, knowing what I've learned about the subject. But at that age, I'm looking at something that's just bewildering to me. And my brain's going through a check down. This isn't a brown bear. This isn't a black bear. This doesn't appear to be a person. It's too big. You know, I was going through all the things this isn't, not immediately arriving to what it was because I had no reference to that.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, my reaction really pure shock. I mean, I was just in bewildered, standing there looking. And I think that probably that not responding, not screaming, not running like that may have played pretty well in my favor at that moment, you know.
I'd say so.
But
which
yeah,
speaks
I was
again, which I think speaks again about your intuition. You know, that there was something that you felt, that relationship. And this is what Brown Dwarf was saying. This is what Jim Ullin was saying. It's quite astounding that, you know, I think there is something in there that it's got to do with those wilderness areas. They're the most natural areas on the planet. And they're a form of permaculture when you get into the deep, dark reaches of them. And you know, something else is going on there. I mean, Ron Moorhead's experiences take into consideration a lot of anomalous light and orb phenomena, some other things that really fit into consistent lines of ufology. And so I think there's a wider, deeper breadth to this thing. And dare I ever use the word paranormal? I think that it's, what would you call it, Aspa?
Well, you know, there's so many people out there researching this now. You know, it's and we don't seem to be getting any closer to getting an answer of what it is. That there's obviously we're missing something. There's some other element to it because, I hear lots of, what is it, Sasquatch Chronicles I used to listen to all the time
Yeah.
because those stories just absolutely fascinated me. That these people that are hunters, that's what they've done all their life. They're able to go out into the woods and they can track anything. They can catch anything, they can shoot anything, and there's so many people out there now with so much equipment, cameras and whatnot, and we're still no closer to being able to capture this thing and to say that it's, and it speaks to us also that we're clearly not as smart as it is.
And we're not as smart as we think we are.
Well,
and
obviously not, because
and
we
there's-
haven't been able to capture it, or even just get a really
But
clear photo.
if we
well,
use common sense, there's something else has got to be going on
Yeah,
here,
yeah.
because with all the technology, satellite technology,
Yeah,
how
yeah.
advanced it is, and I know that we're looking on both sides of the globe at suppression by authorities at
Sure.
times when it comes to these incidents, but we haven't stumbled onto something more profound than the Patterson and Giblin footage. Is it maybe the Todd Standing footage? What do you think of Todd Standing's photographs? They look astounding to me. I've shown them to people that I know that work in the effects industry. Do you think that there's something to support his narrative? Do you think he's being ridiculed for all the wrong reasons?
I don't. I don't. And I only say that because a friend of mine who has a channel called the Sasquatch Detective, Steve Coles, has
Yes.
done probably one of the better jobs that I've seen of kind of dissecting that from day one. You really got to back up. You can't jump into that starting at the pictures. You kind of got to back up, and sometimes that's where we unveil where do we subscribe to this or not, right? And he's showing he did a pretty good job at showing that was probably not a legitimate source to be considering. But listen, when I look at my research approach and applying that scientific method in the field and trying to analyze what it is we're seeing or hearing or looking at, I always start from a flesh and blood point because I have to start somewhere. And that
Sure.
seems
Of
to be a
course.
slot that what I've seen will fit into
Mm.
that flesh and blood point. But I can't be closed-minded so much that when I look at something, I say, am I seeing something that a natural explanation doesn't fit? I mean, do I need to consider something else? I'm willing to have that discussion and I'm open-minded to it. I
Mhm.
just have to start approaching something from one spot. I can't just start saying I'll consider anything and I don't really have a starting point now,
Mhm.
But I try to explain that to people. When it comes to other areas outside of Bigfoot, other areas of the paranormal, I think you bring up a good point. I mean, paranormal, is that really the right word? Because
Well, yeah.
I believe
Mm.
that the phenomena and that ghosts are real. I believe that it makes perfect sense when you consider the expansiveness and how big the universe is,
Mm.
that we aren't the only planet that life can exist on. And when I consider all of that and say, I don't think it's abnormal. I think those areas are probably normal. If they exist, they're normal. It's how
Mm.
we perceive them when we have
Yeah.
an experience that involves that culture and everything else is saying that's not normal.
Yeah.
And so we're starting feeling like we're starting at the crazy perspective, trying to be normal, and all the people who are saying that's not possible for that to be real are starting at the normal perspective. And I don't know that that's the case. If these things are real, if UFOs are real, If alien life exists in somewhere in this universe, if the idea that we got it wrong, you die, some people think it all goes black and it's over. And then there's other religions that look at it, say there's an afterlife. I've heard way too many accounts of ghosts, of experiences with that, to think that this is just a big old coincidence. I mean, I think it's likely that people have experiences like that and they're real. But
I mean, you've explained to us tonight.
And it is abnormal.
Yeah.
I mean, what you've witnessed that you held back for many, many years, even with the person you intimately were involved with, is considered absolutely abnormal, even if you take it from that flesh and blood perspective. And I think that's a very rational place to start. But I also believe we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And when you get someone like Ron Moorhead, who is has such legitimate history to tracking and hunting, who is such a decent human being. And I think Ron is doing what all of us do, desperately trying to hold on to our credibility in the wake of something beyond our understanding. So Ron is now seeing it from the perspective of quantum physics and a quantum reality, something with my lay education I don't understand. Now, recently I interviewed Christopher Noel. He's written this book. He's written 8 books on Sasquatch. He came up with the autistic savant hypothesis, which goes into all the artifacts of being autistic, like stimming, when people see Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the Yowie, the Yeti, sort of moving back and forwards, rocking on that spot is incredibly consistent. Chris has actually gone beyond the quantum theory here, and he goes into the notion of dark matter, which most cosmologists will tell you is there's as much dark matter as there is three-dimensional matter. And he believes that specters and things like that are actually utilizing this dark matter, even Sasquatch at times, to materialize and dematerialize
in our frequency.
It's a very interesting hypothesis. I don't subscribe to any hypothesis, but I think we've just got to keep coming up with numerous ideas around this, because the evidence is leading us there. And in ufology, there was a point where you didn't look into anything peripherally. I think when Linda Moulton Howe, when she was a PBS journalist and went to investigate cattle mutilations, never believed that there'd be a linkage to UFO phenomena. And then you find from a veterinary perspective that this is really very bizarre. You've got animals where certain organs have been surgically removed and cauterized. There's no footsteps around that, yet the people on that property had been in that position an hour beforehand, and they were seeing lights in the sky as well. So I think we've got to be careful. Even Jacques Vallée, who Francis Truffaut played in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, he's your French, one of the world's leading astrophysicists. I mean, he wrote that book, Passport to
Medjugorje,
where he said, no longer can I believe this is a completely three-dimensional phenomena. Now, that's not to say that there are numerous UFO cases where they leave ground traces, they leave indentations, they leave burn marks, the soil composition is changed. For all intensive purposes, it is three-dimensional
it's
when it is
physically
there.
affecting. I say, does it have to be either or? It's got to be one or the other. Why can't it be both? Why do we have to box it box it,
Do you know the I would agree with that. When I think about you had mentioned you had Christopher Noel on. I mean, I'm not gonna say that his approach or his thoughts aren't interesting. I mean, obviously he's put a lot of thought into this and applied kind of his perspective on it. I tend to be a little less reluctant to do that, and that's just me personally. And I think some of that is because from a research perspective, I'm not trying, I'll offer ideas, or when I look at 5 different options that could explain something that I'm looking at in the field, I have to apply the process of elimination to start with and say which 2 are least likely. And that's not saying we throw them out. That's not where I'm going to start. And then out of those couple that are left, I say, what's the most plausible reason that makes sense? And you start there. But then I have to start working to prove this to be true with the same intensity and tenacity that I work to prove that it isn't true.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I mean, so that I can at least figure out where do I go from here. And that doesn't involve the narrative or the perspective. So a lot of times I'm a little bit reluctant to say, people say, why do you think this is the case? If I don't have some type of explanation or reason to really show we see this in other species, whatever, I get less reluctant to go. That doesn't mean I don't have those opinions, obviously.
Yeah,
of course.
But it's, you start talking about them, and you're going to have, and I think that's what some of the people, especially in the Bigfoot community, have made a mistake on, is that the biggest disservice I see being done to this community is people speaking factually about things that they hold to be a hypothesis or something else. I mean, when people say, well, Bigfoot do this, or if you hear 3 knocks followed by 2 knocks, this means this. Well, you may think that in your area you've noticed that, but to speak factually on it is not doing anybody a favor who's here on their own journey of trying to learn. And we're so I'll often kind of prerequisite a lot of the things that I say and say, if my opinion would be that maybe this is an explanation of what this could mean. I don't want to speak factually on these things that aren't facts. And in the Bigfoot community, we have very little facts to deal with, obviously.
Yeah.
But
you have a myriad of reports, and it'd be really sad to think that some of those reports were being sanitized because they slipped off into other peripheral phenomena. We're lucky with the title of our podcast, Jeff, being Down South Anomalies, because last year, as you'd be aware, that the US Navy have actually created a brand new office called the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. And that's an incredible title because it sounds like every anomaly in every domain they're going to resolve.
Exactly.
And I think in the wake of the recent, 1 balloon and 3 unidentified objects at this point being shot down, well, it's not, I'm aware that the All Domain Resolution Office has actually gone from the staff of 3 people, like Project Blue Book, when Ruppelt was in there in the 50s, to now about 3,000 people.
Wow, that's a good boost.
I think they're expecting a large UFO flap, and it's just getting out of control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I would agree. I would agree. I mean, that's one of the things I really find interesting about, I talk a lot about Bigfoot and, cryptids, but when it comes to ufology, when it comes to ghosts and other areas of the paranormal, I would never want somebody to have me on and say, let me interview you. What's your thoughts on this stuff? Because, I have interest in it. I recognize these to be real phenomena. There's just simply too many experiences that exist that involve the word to not.
You can't discount everything
there.
And also, we do hear. We sit here on Untold Radio under the umbrella of one man and an incredible family of children, profound children. What is Alex doing during his podcast? But anyway, Doug has had every peripheral phenomena occur to him that you can imagine. He's had a winged being fly at his car. He's had extraordinary orb and UFO observations where the jetties that were made of aluminium were warping in front of his eyes. So Doug, who, you know, he does accommodate that notion that we're dwelling with this, you know, flesh and blood creature at times in terms of his research deductions. I can remember him saying when that morphed winged creature flew at the wife and into the car, the word that resonated with me, he said, I was extremely humbled. I realized that my worldview had to change yet again.
Yeah, I think that, you know, it's one thing to be involved in productions and work with people who've had experiences, and then you've had experiences yourself in certain areas, but all of a sudden, and maybe in your mind you're thinking, boy, I just had, you know, I don't want to be that guy that says because it happened to me, it couldn't happen to you. Okay, I think Doug's always held that perspective, but
yes,
to actually experience something that maybe in his mind he had checked off a little bit and said, I don't know if I can subscribe to this. And here it is. It's like, what do you do with that? And I can tell you that, you know, out of the 9 live cams that Doug had put up to upload and be able to watch at any time, I have spent dozens of hours looking at video with that Doug shares with me and says, what do you think this is? What does this look like to you? And we have dissected video and we've seen orbs that we've came up with natural explanations. This was a piece of ash from a Canadian forest fire that just was catching that light the right way because we can see it on the leaves catching it from that direction or something like that. Or we've got micro droplets of water that are reflecting, and for that reason, it looks like it appears to be an orb. But then I've seen dozens of videos that there is no explanation that I could find naturally that this is actually what I would say is an orb. I mean, I've seen it several times. We've seen them where they're coming around trees, and where the camera's mounted, they come right up by that camera, and right behind it, coming around the same trees, another one, but at the last minute goes to the other direction of the camera. And it's like, there was something that looks round, plasmic kind of look to it that seems to pulsate and fluctuate, that followed an energy-driven path, and something else was chasing it on the exact same path that looked identical to it. I mean, this isn't 2 pieces of ash floating around. I mean, you know, so
we asked Tara
that's
Carter.
why I just have to try to stay open-minded that, you know, if you would have asked me 4 years ago, do you believe in orbs? I would have said, now I've seen enough to where it's like, dude, I can't explain what that was. You know?
I think a good stance to take is that you believe nothing absolute, but you are open to take the evidence in where it's going to take you. And, you know, Tara, going back to our worldwide adventurer and producer that we had on podcast number 19, she is an editor. She slows down footage to its frame by frame. And I asked her last week, the orbs that she's experienced, orbs that have come out of her body and gone down a train carriage deep in the New York subway system, any of these orbs that she's photographed and filmed, does she consider them to be dust particles or insects? And she said, no, it just isn't there. You know, where we take our lead from very quickly, Jeff, is Charles Fort. We like to think of ourselves as Fortians. Now, Charles Fort was a writer in the late 19th century into the 20th century that collected cases of anomalies that, you know, once he got past 3 consistent anomalies reported by different groups of people or eyewitnesses.
Were they peer-reviewed?
They were never peer-reviewed. Okay. But in the 1970s, another American author, an incredible physicist called William Corliss that's nowhere with us. Can we see that
No, you
there?
can't
So
see
that
that.
Must
is
be a
bizarre.
green. Do you have a green
It's
a
colored
green-
cover
get a
on
blue
it?
one.
What am I doing
Yeah,
holding
get a
up a
blue
green
one.
cover? Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, there
yeah.
you go.
So
There
if
you
you
go.
can see this, he started this thing as Sourcebook Project, right? And
Mhm.
this is like academic texts on the most minute and meticulous areas that anomalies occurred, taking all the cases from peer-reviewed journals like Nature and Science. He literally came up with dozens of these textbooks.
Mm.
I'll just read you the title: Rare Halos, Mirages, and Anomalous Rainbows and Other Related Electromagnetic Phenomena.
This one's Anomalies in
That would be
Geology.
interesting reading.
Yeah, this one's Anomalies in Geology, Physical, Chemical, Biological.
You take the other one. Let's just do that.
What's-
We've got
what's that
about
one?
20 of them.
Oh, this one's Tornadoes, Dark Days, Anomalous Precipitation, and Related Weather Phenomena.
Carolina Bays, Mimima Mounds, submarine cannons, and other topographical anomalous phenomena.
Yeah.
So, there's an encyclopedic set out
Yeah,
there
yeah.
based on the work of Charles Ford by this William R. Corliss, who's no longer with us, where there are literally tens of thousands of anomalies, like the species of life we find every year on this planet we know nothing about. So I just think you don't have to be a contrarian. You don't have to be tilting at windmills. You don't have to be chasing fairies down a garden path, but they're interesting. Fairies sometimes have very similar stories to alien abduction. But you should be open-minded. When you're open-minded, and you know what it's like with a father, your imagination soars. You see the world as a much bigger, more profound place. It becomes all of a sudden exciting again. And I think that that's the way we feel about
Yeah.
this phenomena.
For sure.
Of course, it traumatizes
And I think
people.
that's
'cause it
why a
transmits
lot of
its reality.
people. I think that's why a lot of people get involved in it. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons. Somebody has an experience, and they want to start researching it, and they find out, well, there's a whole community that exists that talks about
Yeah.
like this is something completely unaware of, right? And I think
Yeah.
that happens a lot. And then you have people who look at it from the scientific approach, and what used to drive science a century ago was man's curiosity. We stood and said, what's that light over? We're going to figure it out, right? We're curious enough that drives our want to get the answer. Now, science is oftentimes driven money and agendas. It isn't man's curiosity so much anymore. And that's unfortunate. But, I think a lot of people find different reasons. Some are here just for the entertainment value. They might just be not a believer or a non-believer in any other area of the paranormal, but it's interesting and it's entertaining, and so that's what, and I think that opening your mind up to me, I relate it to my encounter when I was trying to figure out how it got from A to B, probably around 40 yards, without making any noise. There was no wind. The air was cool and very wet, and so to hear you snap your finger from 100, how did this thing get from A to B? And I didn't hear it with all that deadfall and all that. And look at, well, in retrospect, what nations be. When I was in the military, I've seen somebody in the 75th Ranger, been there 6 months, moved through the forest, and then I seen somebody who did it for 14 years. And I watched them move through the forest, and we're talking about two different creatures here. I mean, these guys do it. The one guy has breathed it and lived it for 14 years. So when I look at that and say, is it hard for me as a human who's out in the woods 50 to 100 days a year to think that something that lives there and its ultimate goal is to be elusive and survive for decades, 24 hours a day, every day, could it have simply got so good at something that I can't wrap my head around, fathom that, right? Like, I just can't analyze that correctly. That's, but also you'd have to consider, is there an unknown explanation? Was it able to get to A and B in a way that I'm not even aware you could get from A to B, right? That could be possible too.
Yeah, but see,
the
your
only thing I've ever point out is there might at that natural point, and if it ends up being somewhere else, if I see it or I have an experience, it obviously didn't do that in a natural way. That's the route I'm going to go. I don't care what anybody says to me, you know.
But maybe that that route, that not natural for us, could be something natural for them.
Well, natural.
Yeah, well, what is natural? What is natural? You know, you're saying it's natural
and familiarity.
Yeah, for us.
Yeah, you know,
and what we know.
If there are a lot of things that to you that have a perfectly good explanation in the laws of physics, but yet I just haven't. I see Michael Jackson walk backwards like he does, and it's like, that doesn't seem natural, right?
No, it doesn't.
He was doing it right in front of us. So,
yeah.
But you know, I mean, if we went back to those 2014, the Tic Tacs that have been so beaten about in the last 4 years, we're looking at things there that are not, you know, how could you even postulate that that is something that could be advanced technology when it is so much destroying the notion of our idea of physics, from going 0 to 60,000 miles and stopping on a dime. You know, these things have moments, and, you know, all throughout ufology, there are so many moments, especially in the abduction narratives, where you can't afford to look at the physical world the way we do.
Or the way we know it.
I think Robert Anton Wilson, the late philosopher, he actually stated that old line. What was it? Let me see if I've got what the thinker thinks, the prover proves. And so this idea of the domesticated primate, that's us, thinking that we know the difference between right and wrong and fact and fiction, is just a singularity based on our environmental nature and nurture. And, you know, even though we can tell completely black and white at times in terms of that, like injuring someone else or making sure you care for someone else, that there are other areas where we delude ourselves all the time, convincing ourselves that we are correct in our thinking, but we haven't got the wider, broader picture. All I want to see, Jeff, is people not having shade thrown on them. I don't think the jury's completely in on Todd's standing. Jeff Meldrum even was in his documentary. So there must be something there that gives that man gravitas.
You're right.
Yeah, you know, I've looked at that situation quite in depth, and I've talked to people who were involved. I know Jeff Meldrum after, first of all, the documentary that Todd had done, where after the fact he goes to Jeff's office at the university and interviews him. Jeff's went on and said that interview popped up, heavily edited. Some of that stuff that you're taking from what I'm saying is completely out of context based on how I had actually said it. But like I say, I look at that and say, I understand people feel one way and some people feel another way. I know I feel about it, but listen, I look at people all the time and I acknowledge the fact that I don't have to like somebody to be able to learn something from them.
Oh, no.
Or I don't have to agree with somebody to be able to learn something from them. What I do need to do is present my feelings my questions in a respectful way if I want people to actually have the dialogue with me. And that's probably the biggest issue we're having in any of these communities right now, is that we don't focus on that 80 or 90% we have in common. We take the 10% we don't have in common and we're trying to poison each other with it. And that does not work.
No.
You know,
That's what I don't want to
but
see.
it's happening all the time.
Yeah.
Well, I think the moment you stick your head above water and say anything, whether it's about this anomalous world and the experiences we're having, you get a target painted on you.
Yeah.
And so you've got to take that risk, and it is well worth the risk. But you know what? Maybe I don't have all the pieces to the puzzle
Of course you
that
don't.
is Todd Standing or any of those other people. I just feel like the one thing I don't want to see is that nasty negativity that people will assault you for thinking one way or another. It's just keeping that open mind. And sometimes when I look in the chat at some of these podcasts, I want to fall on the floor and keel over. It's just like really frightening.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, that's one thing that kind of Bigfoot, Sasquatch, phenomenon, other areas of the paranormal. Other areas of the paranormal exist based on there's a lot of footage out there of UFOs, lights in the sky that don't seem to be doing natural things. There's a lot of explanations. There's a lot of narrative out there, people sharing their opinions on stuff. We even have governments coming forward and saying, here's a little bit of light. You know, we don't want to show you the whole picture, but they aren't denying it. I mean, we even had that in the weather balloon issue. Me and Doug had talked about that, where the head general of the U.S. Air Force, General NORAD, on and says, we're not ruling out that this could be extraterrestrial.
Don't you love that? That was a great moment.
Did you just see that? Really? You just said that. Yeah, like, you might as well hand the key to everything that's locked in the closet in the White House and just let it out, because you just admitted, you know. And so you see these things happening, and it's like, you know, I have to say that I'll stay open-minded about things. I'll recognize that I will have a different opinion than some other people do, but I'll always treat people as a human being with respect. And even if you don't get that always in return, you know, I mean, but that's it.
And that's the way to do it.
Nobody's
And
going to come out and ever say, go ahead.
I sort of, if I'm going to have a belief, and I don't like that word belief, because I think from your encounter, it's not a question of belief. You
knowing.
already know.
Yeah, by default, I don't get to choose anymore.
I had a similar incident when I was a school boy at my school, and it was not, we had that incident in Melbourne here where there are hundreds of eyewitnesses and objects landed in the school, but I saw an object with the entire school playground at lunchtime hovering over our football fields adjacent to the school, and that sort of kicked me over. And you know, it was an hour of lunchtime. The science teachers were freaking out, trying to make this thing out to be a weather balloon, but I've never seen a weather balloon hover that low for that long. And just one of those moments. So it's not a question of belief, you know. So once you know that something's adrift in the reality, that there's a dereliction of duty in terms of science, and all of us have to turn into rogue scientists in a way to actually research this material or give some support to the people that have experienced it, there is no turning back.
No.
Yeah, no, I agree. One of the things I was mentioning earlier is that I think what makes the Bigfoot mystery so much different than the rest of the paranormal is that we're talking about something that you do have a lot of people who are trying to hoax in this area of the paranormal. And I believe that it's a little bit easier to look at some of these videos, some of these pictures, and look at the metadata. Look and find evidence. Is this a costume or not? You know, it's a little bit easier to identify, is this a hoax or is this a prank, versus ufology, or, you know, what people are capturing in their haunted investigations of a prison or things like that. I mean, when you have audio recordings, this is what's happening. I mean, so I think that you see that more in the Bigfoot world, but I want it done fairly. If you got proof and it is proof, then go ahead and expose some hunting. Because if they are hunting, they probably should be exposed for it. But
yeah,
I think that sets a lot of people that have this default BS in they want. As soon as they see a picture, I'm throwing the flag. Now I want to see if I can find a reason to pick it up, rather than let me see if I can find a reason to throw the flag. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's just been this action. Oh, it's a hoax, you know.
I've always found that in ufology that it's extrapolated in the mainstream media that there is a large number of hoaxes. I'm yet to statistically look at the data that states that that's true. I think there's a lot less hoaxes than what we realize, and there's a lot more sincere people. We had a great case here with that lady. She was filming at Chipping Norton. She got 5 shots in the morning going to work.
Yeah.
And what happened to her?
Well, she on her iPhone she caught these 5 photographs, and immediately she was asked on television if she'd been drinking or if she was on drugs. And she said, whether I was or not is inconsequential because my iPhone was not drunk or on drugs.
And it has,
do you know what I mean? So it's like
date stamp. It
it's
has
like
a time.
what? Because I might have been drunk or I might have been on drugs, I actually manifested, you know, images on my mobile, on my iPhone. How does that work?
And you know, then you've got the other side of the scale. You've got people like Terence McKenna, the late Terence McKenna, who said, the only time I've experienced anomalous phenomena or what you could call aliens was when I was on drugs, when I was on DMT for research purposes. And DMT, unlike psilocybin, seems to give people a very consistent experience that is in line with native shaman culture and when they actually go to visit the gods. It's consistently similar. And you tell me some other sort of psychoactive derivative that gives people the same experience. So he would suggest get on the drugs and you will experience it genuinely. So I think there's arguments on either side. And the point of fact is just don't throw shade. You know, if you don't like what someone's saying, turn off the podcast or listen to it and maybe your mind will grow. You know what? We're not here forcing an education on people. We're here because we're trying to construct a community where there's a counterpoint to the tsunami of other data that says this can't be a possibility, because we've all had experiences and know it can.
Yeah.
And it is.
Yeah.
And I'm humbled by it. And I'm humbled by you, Jeff. And I'm humbled by your family. And I love that suit your son was wearing. And I want him to know it. Plaid is fantastic and will never go out of date.
No, it won't. I feel the same way. I think about that. When I was in high school, it was cool then. Prior to that, the Beatles were wearing it. The Stones were wearing it. I mean, it just seems like it's always going to be part of fashion. So what just about my oldest son last year for prom. He says, I got a
like
date
a
for prom.
gentleman.
I said, awesome. And he said, he's not a popular kid in school. He's had self-esteem issues.
So what?
And he sees that I wear with my real estate firm. A lot of times I'll wear fitted suits that are plaid or, you know, kind of trendy, maybe a little Kentucky look to it, you know. I mean,
Wow.
it's fun. I'm fun with what I wear. But my kid was I need to rent a tux. I said, you need to rent a tux. I said, let's get you a new suit. And we got a fitted suit that was 3-piece. I mean, he looked pretty dapper, man.
He
And
looked
he
incredible
went
in
to
it.
prom and he had teachers lined up to take their picture with him because they
They
thought,
could see it.
and really did a lot for his self-esteem. But that's the picture you saw of him. And it's fun to hear that when you have a kid who's suffering a little bit of self-esteem issues, not feeling good about himself, to come home and you say, how did it go? And I'm dreaming what I'm going to hear. Like, is he going to tell me it was a bad experience? And he's like, it was awesome. You know, I mean,
Wow. That's what
as a
that's what you live
parent,
for.
it was great.
It can't get better
Yeah,
than that. And you
it
know
is.
what? Self-esteem issues, they will work their way out of him. And it shows that he has got humility. At least you haven't created another narcissist to add to the pantheon of sociopaths that invaded this planet. Let's not worry about the aliens. Sociopaths are everywhere.
Yeah.
And they've got no conscience. They're invaders.
Yeah.
What we need is more heart and soul. We need a bit more love.
Culture is always going to be telling a certain percentage of people, you look right, you're doing it right, you sound right, you make sense. But at any given moment, culture is always speaking to another segment of people saying, you don't look right. You're not saying the right thing. You're not acting like you should. And so, you know, that's why I say, I think one of the most important things that we can do is going to be on a podcast trying to entertain people, educate people, build value in what we are passionate about. Is we need to project that ability to build value others and find joy, you know, and not look at all the things in this world that we can wake up and be pissed off about today. You know, I mean, it just doesn't make
sense.
for a great life. It just doesn't, man.
No.
But well, I want to
And
thank
you know
you guys again for getting up at
you know
3
what?
in the
We're as
morning and joining us.
You know, but we're as excited as you are. And, you know, if people are out there going to throw shade on us for talking over the top of each other, that's because it's hard when you're doing a podcast from this distance. You've got a bit of time delay, but also you want to get in there and commune with that person and release what's deep within your soul because you find some sense of simpatico. And Jeff, we have felt that from day one with you and everyone on the Untold Radio Network to say that. But you are an extraordinary person. We admire the amount of podcasts that you do and the fact that you, I think you're a great father and, you know, give our love and respect to your wife. And the one thing I think I was going to say there, I carry on with a lot of waffling.
Don't you just?
But the one thing I was going to say is, the podcasts give people that moment to actually release these stories. And I'm astounded at even the guests we've had on, and I can hear them in every other podcast, that this is possibly the first time they've ever articulated that story. And they're doing it because they feel comfortable with that person that's doing the cast, and they do it because they need to do it.
Yeah.
And you're probably
would
shocked that
totally
I've gone
agree with
silent there. You're probably shocked that I've actually shut up
No,
there.
no, I was no, I listen. I almost everything you've said today, I have been at one point I took myself off the screen and just put you on. I felt, man, not only am I really interested in what he's saying, but I want him to have the whole screen. So I could do all day long with you, Jay.
Rant.
And you too, Aspacia. I really appreciated you guys. Honestly, when if we're being completely honest, when we started the network, we had a couple weeks into it, and then Doug said, we're bringing in Down South Anomalies. I'm like, well, I hadn't heard of them before. I mean, this is going to be intriguing. And the first show that I watched of yours, I don't know the first Mysterious Libraries I watched. Their first episode was on the Loch Ness Monster. And I'm thinking, I don't know if I believe in the Loch Ness Monster, right? But I'm going to watch it. I was entertained, but I was intrigued by it. I was really impressed with how some people were, how Dean and Jim were presenting what book spoke about and what the author was trying to cover, and whether or not I believe the Loch Ness Monster is real or not. That was an educational show for me. I mean, I learned from it. And so when I started watching your episodes, I was really intrigued by the subject matter, the guests, the way that they articulate themselves. And in the end, to say, oh, I believe 100, I agree 100% with what they're saying. I don't agree 100% with what anybody says.
No,
maybe 99, maybe only 10. I don't know, but I appreciate when I see these guests talking about things that I'm not familiar with or I don't have experience with, to be able to really let their passion, their want to tell people about. Maybe it's something that happened to them. Maybe it's something they've wrote about. Maybe it's something that they've recently learned about. I don't see any university handing out degrees that are doctorates in Bigfootology or doctorates in ufology. We are all the professors and we are all the students. We are learning and teaching each other every day. And we just got to be mindful of that.
Yeah, and we've got to show some care for our community.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I've seen a lot, on Facebook. When I followed you on Facebook, Jay, see how active you are in that supportings that are going on there, fundraiser efforts, social issues, things like this. I really appreciate that about you, because you're not somebody sitting behind a microphone. You're somebody who's getting out and being active, and I think that's to be commended. So,
Jeff, I take my lead from my wife. My wife has got the most well-aligned moral compass, and everything she does is for others. I'm a lot more selfish person than she will ever be.
No, you're not.
And she is an incredibly passionate, community-minded person, and a great grandmother and a great mother against all odds. And if we had more time, I'd get her to tell you about a birth story.
God, don't go
That
there.
is in the documentary, and people can have a look at that on Vimeo.
I've done it on the show.
Maybe we'll send a link to you. But, I also want to say just what an honor it is to be in the presence of you and the other people on the cast. And that, I think our future is really exciting. And I really believe if we're going to be doing 52 casts, you're going to be doing at least 104 each year. That if I could predict anything, and I should never predict anything, that we're all going to end up in the Woo Nation, but just out of desperation to fill these casts in the end.
Yeah, but we might hit on something then, mightn't we?
Yep.
Just open it all up.
Yeah. Well, it's been an honor to be on Coffee Time, Jeff. Thank you so much for letting us talk all over the top of you.
Well, I appreciate you setting your alarm for 3 a.m. and getting up and doing this. You could probably go back and catch a couple hours of sleep where you have to get up again. So.
It's 5:25 a.m. now. So.
You know what the problem is here? It's been a really bad heat wave.
We've had
for weeks.
Shocking heat.
And we're actually in a warehouse with no air conditioning on an upper floor.
What was today? Yesterday.
Well into the
last
30s.
night, well into the 30s, which is up around 100, but the humidity
It's
is
dreadful
just
in this city.
stifling.
It's a nightmare.
Stifling. Anyway.
Yeah, but you know what? People are living
Wow.
through so much
Well,
worse.
you know.
And we're on coffee time, so we're actually in heaven. I don't care what the temperature is.
Yeah. Anyway. Maybe
Yep.
I'm so tired now. I'll
All
just be
right,
able
guys.
to
Well,
drop.
if you want to hang out backstage, I'll pop back and talk to you a little bit more here in just a moment while I get this landed here.
And we had so
Okay.
much we didn't cover. I wanted to
it's
actually
always like
go
that.
into the whole notion of like musicians and anomalous experiences. You know, Travis Walton.
I will do that show.
Who was
We'll do that show.
you know, the person that Fire in the Sky was based on. And that was Tracy Torme, Mel Torme's son, that was the producer of that film. He actually quietly had lunch with us in Katoomba and spoke to us about the phone calls he receives from musicians all the time because they're on the road touring that have
And they
had
see
major
things.
UFO experiences.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there is a whole history that's virtually very poorly documented. I think Alien Rock's the only book
the only
that
book
really
that's been written on it.
consolidates any of those stories. John Lennon was having those experiences. Even Mel Torme, the Velvet Fog, the father of Tracy Torme, the producer of Fire in the Sky, he actually witnessed a UFO in the main streets of
in
New
New York,
York,
so-
driving his Harley Davidson.
There you go.
And Aspa's got all her stories.
Well, it would
with
be
her
fun to
father
have
in
a
Greece.
show.
Yeah, we'll probably end
It
up
would
doing
be fun
one
a show that
soon.
where we
Yeah.
talk about a lot of those people that I think what I'm going to end up doing is coffee time. You know, we've only got 8 or 9 hosts that we're going to do. And then where do you go with it? Right.
Well,
I
that's
would
right.
like to start having these, you know, a lot of our podcasts are kind of designed to fit in a box. You know, for instance, Mysterious Libraries, Dean and Jason, they're going to talk about literature, right? I mean, a
Brilliant
different book
stuff.
every time. For me, I'm looking at the nuts and bolts approach to Bigfoot and Sasquatch research. Dr. Russ Jones and Brad were a lot of different areas on wide open research. Probably the most versatile one is Alex and Doug on the flagship audio show. They talk about it's a crapshoot where they're going to go that week, and that's what makes that show fun. But we could sing coffee time as an opportunity for you hosts to circle back, and we can talk about whatever we want to talk about. So, I mean,
Exactly.
we could certainly do an opportunity to
I want to
have
talk
that
about you supporting the
conversation.
Replacements live. That's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about that incredible musical history of yours. And now my wife's hitting me because we're coming
I'm
up
not
to
hitting you.
the
Yeah.
2-hour mark.
We are, aren't we? Wow.
Well, I will put you guys in just a minute, and I'll be back again. Well, I appreciate. I've got a couple things I want to pop up here and show. We've got a new show coming to the Untold Radio Network. It's going to be starting in a few weeks. I'm going to play a little trailer. So yeah, that'll be kind of cool. Podcast host Andy McGrath is bringing the show Beastly Theories to the Untold Radio Network. I also wanted to take a moment and just kind of recap last week. Jay and Aspacia on their show Down South Anomalies had Tara Foster on. You heard us speak about that a little bit. You can go back and watch any of these shows or listen to any of them on the Untold Radio Network's podcast platforms. We're on every platform. Russ and Brad over at Wide Open Research had Katie Elizabeth on, who spoke about lake monsters, and that was kind of cool. They were talking about Champ up there in New York and a lot of different things they covered in that, and I thought that was kind of intriguing. Doug and Alex did 2 shows, a part 1 and part 2. It was really interesting. They had a Mount St. Helens Bigfoot roundtable where they had about 8 guests on who shared an awful lot of information, a lot of stories that were shared, a lot of encounters that were shared, experiences. I would encourage everybody to check that out. They did 2 2-hour shows in one night, so live. So yeah, go look at that. Mysterious Libraries. They had the conspiratologist on, which is a term I hadn't even heard before, but they were going to, and I'm not sure if the guest, if it got canceled or whatnot. I remember most of that show. I was watching it. Dean and Jason were having a great conversation. It was really interesting. Sasquatch Outpost, the host Jim Myers, that's our new show, started a couple weeks ago. Had a guest on, had guests Jim and Diana on. On my show, Pine Island Research, as you heard us mention, I had Brown Dwarf on, researcher from up in the Pacific Northwest, shared a lot of experiences that were very, very interesting. And last week on Monday morning, like I had mentioned, we had Jason McLean on Coffee Time, and that was a fun conversation too. But I encourage everyone to pop in tonight. Check out my show. Starts at 8 p.m. Central, 9 Eastern. We're going to have Tim and Dana Halloran on. Next week on Monday night on my show, Jay had mentioned Ron Moorhead. Well, guess what? I've got a really different show that night. I'm going to have Ron Moorhead on, and I'm going to have Todd Neese on. These guys are friends. I've had Todd on before twice. Love interviewing Todd. He had a great encounter when he was in the military. And he's just a great, great guy. Developed a friendship with him. But him and Ron are close friends who have spent an awful lot of time out in the field together for years. And we're going to light the campfire, and these two are going to sit around and they're going to start telling stories and sharing experiences that they've had to get out in the field. Some of which you may have never heard before or heard anywhere else. So I'm really looking for that type of a show. These two are just going to come in and start kicking around the memories, and it's going to be very, very fun to just sit there by the fire with them and eavesdrop. So I encourage everybody to check that show out that Monday night. But until then, everybody take care, stay healthy. I appreciate you taking your time to pop in this morning and spend some time with us. It was fun visiting with Jay and Aspacia. I hope everybody appreciated that and checks out their show this week. And we will see you guys later.